Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. Well, congratulations, you're at the end of section 4. You've done really well so far. We're getting through the course and it won't be long till we're finished and you'll be ready to sit your exam. So let's start where we first started, which was with CloudTrail. So what is CloudTrail? Well, it's basically a web service that records AWS API calls for your account and delivers the log files to you. So we have our user. Our user is accessing the AWS console. They could be using the command line or could be doing something using the SDKs, whatever. And they're essentially accessing a public API, which is the control plane for Amazon Cloud. That user could be going in and provisioning DynamoDB databases, S3 buckets, EC2 instances, etc. And then basically what CloudTrail is doing is it's logging all those API calls to a bucket. Now, it's API calls only. CloudTrail wouldn't know whether or not that user was going in and doing what they're doing over RDP or what they're doing over SSH. That's not logged. It's API calls only, and it's all logged to an S3 bucket. So what is logged? Well, our metadata around our API calls, so the identity of the API caller who's making the call, the time of the call, the source IP address of the API caller, so what's their IP, the request parameters, what is it they're actually trying to do? Are they trying to provision an EC2 instance or a DynamoDB database? And then the response, was that actually successful? Were they able to provision that EC2 instance? In terms of CloudTrail event logs, they're sent to an S3 bucket. You manage the retention in S3. Remember, S3 is designed to be highly available and durable storage. So it will just continue to log stuff into S3. You need to set up, basically lifecycle management policies to decide how long you want to keep that data, and do you want to delete it or do you want to send it to Glacier? It's delivered every 5 minutes with up to a 15-minute delay. You get notifications that are available, so you can have it notify your phone or through your email using SNS, and then you can also aggregate your data across regions. You can also aggregate it across accounts, so you can set up a dedicated AWS account that is literally your CloudTrail logs, and only you have access to that AWS account. Nobody else has access to it, and then it's basically just a black hole of log data. You can validate the logged CloudTrail log file integrity. Basically, you can see whether or not it was modified or deleted. You can do this using SHA-256 hashing or SHA-256 with RSA for digital signing. Log files are always delivered with a digest file, and you can actually use the digest file to go in and validate the integrity of the log files as well. Make sure you protect your CloudTrail logs because they contain everything that you are doing in your AWS account, and they could also contain personally identifiable information. Allow your security people admin access to CloudTrail, but auditors read-only access using IAM, and then restrict access to your S3 bucket policies and use multi-factor authentication delete on your objects. You should use lifecycle rules to move the data to Glacier or to delete it, and always check the integrity of your log files using your digest files. Moving on to CloudWatch. CloudWatch is basically a monitoring service. We all know that from the associate level exams, but it is a bit more than a monitoring service. So, it consists of 3 different things. We've got CloudWatch itself, CloudWatch logs, and then CloudWatch events. CloudWatch itself has basically, it's real time. It can either be 5 minutes or 1 minute, depending on whether or not you turn on detailed monitoring. The metrics, it has a whole bunch of different metrics that you can monitor. It has alarms built into it, and when that alarms are triggered, you can send off custom notifications. And then, of course, you can have custom metrics, which you'll need to script yourself. And we do that in the SysOps Administrator course. We set up some Python scripts to see how much our RAM utilization that we're using. In terms of CloudWatch logs, they're pushed from some AWS services, including CloudTrail. You can push them from your applications and systems internally, so you can actually have your own data center that and use CloudWatch to log what's going on in there. It doesn't have to be within AWS. You can have metrics from log entry matching, and CloudWatch logs are stored indefinitely. It's not actually inside a user S3 bucket like it is with CloudTrail. I'm sure they are utilizing S3 on the back end, but it's not something that's apparent to you. You can't just go into S3 and see all your CloudWatch logs in a bucket. Moving on to CloudWatch events, let's look at how it works. So we've got our user, they're making an API call using the console to our control plane, which is basically a whole bunch of public APIs. We've got CloudTrail turned on and it's logging those, those calls to a bucket. Then what's happening is the user goes in and they provision an EC2 instance. That creates an event source inside of CloudTrail. CloudTrail can then send that event source onto CloudWatch events, which basically has a whole bunch of rules, and it evaluates the rules and saying, okay, is this user allowed to provision EC2 instances? That would then basically go off to an event target, which will be a Lambda function. The Lambda function would take this information and say, okay, this user is definitely not allowed to be triggering EC2 instances. I'm going to go in and terminate that. So you can use CloudWatch events to have event-driven security. So your AWS environment can automatically react to users depending on what event rules you put in there and what your event targets specify. So CloudWatch events, a near real-time stream of your system events. Your events can consist of AWS resource state changes. It could consist of things like CloudTrail API calls, which is what we just saw an example of. We can have custom events. We can also have scheduled events. Your rules basically match your incoming events and route them to one or more targets, and your targets basically consist of normally Lambda function or an SNS topic, or it could be an SQS queue or a Kinesis stream. So I hope that explains CloudWatch events. Moving on to AWS Config. It's basically a fully managed service that provides you with AWS resource inventory, configuration history, and configuration change notifications to enable security and governance. The cool thing about Config is you can turn it on and you can see everything that's going on inside what AWS resources you're using inside your AWS account. It has compliance checks, so you can trigger this either periodically, so every 24 hours, or you can do just a configuration snapshot delivery. It has a whole bunch of managed rules, so there's about 40 of them at the time of recording. This time last year there was 20, so it has doubled since I've been using this service, and they're quite basic, but they're very fundamental rules, like do you have SSH open to the world on your security groups. In terms of the permissions needed for config, you require an identity access management role, and basically you need to have read-only permission to the recorded resources. You will need write access to S3 in order to do the logging, and you will need publishing access to SNS in order to get your alerts. And then, of course, the console will create this for you when you go in and set it all up. You should restrict access to config rules. Your users should be authenticated with AWS, and they should have the appropriate permissions set in IAM to get access. Only your administrators of your AWS account really need access to go in and set this stuff up, and they will require full access. You should provide read-only permissions for your day-to-day use, so people who are going in there and just monitoring it, you only want them to be able to read it. You don't want them to be able to go in and change some rules. In terms of monitoring config, you can use CloudTrail with config to provide deeper insight into your resources, and you can also use CloudTrail to monitor access to config, such as someone going in and stopping the config recording. They could go ahead and do that, but of course that would all be logged through CloudTrail. So again, turn on CloudTrail, turn it on everywhere. CloudTrail is amazing. So how do we set up alerts if a root user logs in? Well, the first thing we need to do is turn on CloudTrail and CloudWatch logs. So you need not just CloudTrail, but you need to turn on the CloudWatch logs integration, which is what we saw in the lab. We then have to go through and create a metric filter, then assign a metric, and then create an alarm. We then basically send this alarm if it alerts to an SNS topic. We have to go in and subscribe to that SNS topic and verify our email address. And then essentially every time a root user logs in, we're going to receive an alert from basically from a combination of CloudTrail and CloudWatch logs. So do remember that as an important exam topic going into your exam. Okay, so moving on to Cloud HSM. Now this one's quite interesting. Cloud HSM was very heavily featured in the 2016 exam, which then got subsequently pulled. And then with the 2018 exam, it actually doesn't feature very heavily at all, which is quite surprising. That being said, if you want to work as a security professional, you're going to need to understand Cloud HSM inside out. So for that reason, I do have a dedicated section on Cloud HSM. We will go and provision our own Cloud HSM, but the issue is that it's optional. It's completely optional. It's not really a heavy exam topic. So I've put that towards the very end of the course. It's completely optional as to whether or not you want to do it. It definitely is worth doing to understand Cloud HSM, and if you want to work work in a security field, understanding Cloud HSM is essential. The cool thing about how Cloud HSM is it's now accessible to everyone. Even just 12 months ago, it cost $5,000 a month to have a Cloud HSM device. Amazon have changed the pricing now, and you just pay by the minute. So getting a hands-on Cloud HSM experience is fantastic, for a job. That being said, it doesn't really feature too heavily in the exams. You might see 1 or 2 questions. You're basically asking, what it is. So what is it? Well, it's a service that helps you meet corporate, contractual, and regulatory compliance requirements for data security using dedicated hardware security modules. So this is dedicated to you. It's not multi-tenant, and it gives you a lot more options than KMS. Let's compare the two. So tenancy, it's dedicated. KMS is multiple tenancy. Scale and high availability. You do get a HA service from AWS, but you do have to go in and configure your own dedicated devices. They will basically handle all the replication for you. KMS is all handled by default behind the scenes. The key, you have absolute key control with Cloud HSM, and it can produce both, we're going to come on to that, symmetric and asymmetric keys. Basically a symmetric key is just where you've got one key, so you would use that for encrypting data, for example. Asymmetric key is where you've got a private key and a public key, so you've got 2 keys. So when you log into your SSH, terminals, that's using asymmetric keys. Now, the cool thing about Cloud HSM is you can generate your own asymmetric keys, which you can then use with EC2. You can't do that with KMS because KMS is symmetric only. So with Cloud HSM, you control all the keys. With KMS, it's you and a combination of AWS. You get broad support across both devices now. You used to not really get good support for Cloud HSM from AWS about 12 months ago, but it is really much better supported now. Terms of compliance, this could be where it comes up in your exam. It's FIPS 142 and EAL4 compliant, whereas KMS just has good compliance. And in terms of price, Cloud HSM is a little bit more expensive than KMS, not as much as it used to be. It used to be $5,000. I think it was a month, or it was an activation fee or something. Definitely 5,000 sticks in my mind. So, for students, it was just not usable because, you're paying $29 for a course or $99 or however much for membership, $250. Then you're going and paying for your exams, which are $150 to $300, depending on which exams that you're doing. You're not going to want to pay $5,000 just to get some hands-on experience with Cloud HSM. Thankfully, that has all changed now, and you just pay by the hour. It's about $1.20 an hour from memory, something around that level. So do bear that in mind. So Cloud HSM does not feature heavily in the exam. There's probably going to be 1 or 2 questions on it, and they're quite high level. That being said, you really should know this if you want to work in security, and it is an awful lot of fun. So we do have a dedicated deep dive session to Cloud HSM at the end of the course, and in the actual course chapter, I've put it as optional. So it's completely optional as to whether or not you do that. Moving on to Inspector, and again, Amazon like to confuse people by, trying to say, should you use Inspector for this or should you use Trusted Advisor? Inspector basically goes in and inspects our EC2 environments for key security issues and then gives us a report on them. So how does it work? We created an assessment target. We installed our agents on our EC2 instances. We created an assessment template. We then ran an assessment run that can be anywhere from 1 hour to 24 hours, depending on how long you want, it to run. You can then view the findings against the rules. So we had a report. The rules basically are 4 right now. So there's common vulnerabilities and exposures. There's the Center for Internet Security Operating Systems Security Configuration Benchmarks. We've got security best practices, and we've got runtime behavior analysis. That is then basically split up into 4 different rules. So we've got high, medium, low, and informational. High is the ones you want to be most concerned about. Once those rules are run, essentially it's split into 4 different severity levels. So we've got high, medium, low, and informational. High is obviously the one you want to worry about. So what will AWS Inspector do? It's going to monitor the network file systems and process activity from within the specified targets. It can compare what it sees to general security rules. It can report on the issues observed within the targets during a run, and then it will give you a nice report and advise on remediation. That report is available to you, can be encrypted as well, and you can download it as a PDF. It's not going to relieve you of your responsibilities under the shared responsibility model, and it's definitely not going to perform miracles. With Trusted Advisor obviously does security, but it also does cost optimization, it does availability, and it does performance. And if you remember, only a certain number of features for Trusted Advisor are available if you've got no support or just developer support. If you want to unlock all the features, you need business or enterprise support. So that is it for the end of section 4. Well done. You've done really, really well. I hope you are learning an awful lot. In the next section, we're going to deep dive into KMS and a whole bunch of other different infrastructure products. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next section. Thank you.